Well, hello everyone, and a very warm welcome during this frosty week to today's afternoon tea with the incredible Jack Thorne. This is our first afternoon tea of 2021, and it is brought to you in association with our friends over at the Royal Society of Literature. It is so lovely, as always, to see so many regulars showing their support, and I'm equally delighted to see so many new names joining us as well, in spirit if not in person. I'm reliably informed that includes enthusiasts from the younger end of the age spectrum, and that's perhaps no surprise given our guest today. Welcome all, and do introduce yourselves in the chat. For those who don't know me, I'm Theo. I'm a contracts advisor at the SOA, and I also help to run the Scriptwriters Group. Most importantly, however, I'm a big fan of yours, Jack, and you're really quite outstanding and wide-ranging portfolio of work across stage and screen. A couple of housekeeping bits just before we start the event proper. All you regulars will know all this by now, and I'm well aware you are all here to hear from Jack, so I will just go through it without dither or delay. This event is part of the SOA at Home Festival series and is, in common with all our afternoon tea sessions, free. But if you can afford to donate a few pounds to the Authors Contingency Fund to support authors in financial difficulty due to the health crisis, and I should be clear that this includes scriptwriters, we'll pop a link at the top of the chat window over on the right-hand side. We'll be together for around 45 minutes today. We're not expecting any turbulence, but if you do experience any connection difficulties at any time, just press the red reconnect button at the top of your screen. Moving on, I will just briefly introduce Jack, and then we'll get right into it with a few questions from me before I open the digital floor for questions from you. Feel free to pop those in the chat as we go through, and we'll try to answer as many as we can. And so to our esteemed guest. Jack is a writer of film, television, and theatre. In film, his credits include Wonder, Radioactive, The Secret Garden for Sky, and The Aeronauts for Amazon Prime. His television work includes National Treasure, Kiri, Don't Take My Baby, The Virtues, his Dark Materials, of course, for the BBC, and the Eddy for Netflix. For theatre, his plays include Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, When You Cure Me, Hope, A Christmas Carol, and The End of History. Jack is patron of the Graeae Theatre Company and also an associate artist at the Old Vic Theatre in London. Finally, Jack was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature in 2020 and is on the RSL Open Panel of Fellows. More on that shortly. Jack, hello and welcome.
Hello. That's very nice.
Do we find you in good health and high spirits?
Relatively good health. My knees could be better. High-ish spirits. Yeah. Coping with homeschool, trying to work out how to do it.
Oh, well, it's so gracious of you to allow us through your keyhole today. So where do we find you? Are you speaking to us from your writing desk, or should I ask, which world are you in? If this is an afternoon tea event, what do you drink in your world?
Water and juice. So yeah, no, very boring, very boring. And yeah, this is where I write. Yeah, in my house. So I can always hear my boy downstairs shouting away at whatever,
And so I sense that you're using a fixed camera, so we can't be too nosy. But can you tell us, do you like to keep a tidy desk, or is it covered with stacks of notebooks, scripts, or awards?
It's relatively tidy at the moment for me, which is quite untidy by most people's standards. And yeah, it's just covered in notes. It's covered in notes from people saying what my script should be, and sadly aren't, mostly.
And do you have something of a routine? What does your normal day look like for you?
At the moment, it's a bit different in that homeschool's involved. So it's going up and downstairs to help with the kid as he's learning phonics. I've got a 4-year-old, and learning a lot more about English literature already than and the way that the English language works than I thought I should be. Learning about naughty words this morning, naughty letters, naughty words, naughty letters, A and then something and then E. A naughty E. I don't know what, I can't remember now. It's all gone from my head. Yeah. But all that sort of thing. But mostly I try and be at my desk by 8:39 and with parental things, I try and make through till 6 or so at night. And then there's sometimes calls in the evening from various different people and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I like working. I love it, in fact.
Yeah. Is there anything that you find essential to enable you to get down to your desk, or something you really need to give you that inspiration or the motivation to keep going?
No, I've never really struggled with that. Insecurity is my most useful motor, and I always have a healthy supply of that, which helps.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the important work that you're doing as a fellow of the RSL to support writers from the communities, backgrounds and experiences currently underrepresented in the UK literary culture through the RSL Open Fellowship recruitment programme?
Yeah.
What can those joining us today do to get involved in that? Yeah,
it's right at the start of it. So, and I've only just got involved, and we haven't had a meeting yet. But we're at the point where we're seeking applications. It's a scheme that's designed to try and extend the fellowship and try and make it more diverse and more representative. Actually, I don't like the word diverse, more representative. In particular, looking for writers of colour, writers, LGBTQ writers, writers from different socioeconomic classes, writers outside London, and my particular interest, which is writers with disabilities, and trying to extend the pool so that the Royal Society can change and transform as it needs to as our country has changed and transformed.
And are you accepting nominations from everyone? I mean,
I think so, yes. The readers and writers from across the UK are invited to recommend writers for nomination. I'm reading it from a sheet so that I don't get it wrong. So yes, that is the case.
Perfect. And so just to look a little bit at your work, your name is synonymous with highly successful adaptations of very well-known literary properties. From Philip Pullman to J.K. Rowling, from Charles Dickens to Arthur Conan Doyle, and also for our European friends, from Georg Büchner to Friedrich Dürrenmatt. Apologies for any pronunciation mishaps there. Taking perhaps your most recent adaptation, which was the historic materials for the BBC, which so many of us enjoyed just before Christmas. What can you tell us about how that adaptation process worked? And just to bring in a question sent in advance by Sanjida K and her daughter, how do you select which material to keep, what to get rid of, and how to order or reorder the scenes?
So I think at the beginning of any adaptation process, I sort of have a question to myself about loyalty, in terms of how loyal do I need to be? How loyal have I been instructed to be? And how loyal should I be? And sometimes I don't feel the need to be loyal at all. With Christmas Carol, for instance, I don't feel like Charles Dickens needs his work told exactly as he would tell it, because that work has been done on stage so many times that you don't have the responsibility of the author breathing down your neck, whether they be dead or alive. I mean, that your job is to be the holder of the key of the book, and with that, I felt like my key could go in different directions, and that what was interesting was to find a different take on it. With Philip and his Dark Materials, right from the beginning, Jane Trant and I felt like TV was the perfect medium for these books, in terms of the perfect way to translate the wealth within them to another medium. Obviously, the perfect medium for them is the books themselves, but we felt like TV could do something here, and so we felt like our main job was to be as loyal as possible. Now, you can't be completely loyal. You can't literally transcribe things, because TV has different demands within it about the way you tell a story, about the fact that you can't go inside someone's head, about all those different things. But the question we always asked ourselves is, how does Philip tell this scene, and how can we tell this scene as close to Philip as possible? And so, yeah, extreme loyalty was the answer to that, which isn't the case every time.
Yes, because your film for Prime, The Aeronauts, which I think as of January 2020 was the most streamed film on Prime. That could be from their original commissioning rather than their their third-party offering. But that was based on the 2013 book Falling Upwards by Richard Holmes. And that immediately offers a sort of more liberal principle of adaptation. Yeah. Does that present its own freedoms and challenges?
Yeah, I mean, Aeronauts was very different. We optioned the book. Tom Harper, who directed it, and I optioned the book before any other film company had got involved, and we developed it. And we developed it with Richard aware of what we were doing. It's a factual book, so there's also the other thing of that you're not replicating fact is even more difficult, but also we wanted to tell a story of daring do, and we were using elements of the original whilst also creating elements of our own that involved a lot of aeronauting history and taking different bits and pieces from all over the place. The fact we were very strict about was how high they went, but what they did up there was very different from the truth of what actually happened.
Yeah. And then your adaptation of Harry Potter for the stage was yet again different, because Harry Potter and his world was already obviously established, yet the story and the script were original, albeit written in collaboration with J.K. Rowling. Was there anything particularly notable about how that sort of came about, that opportunity and the whole experience of taking that through production that you might like to share?
Well, it was an extraordinary experience that I don't think I'll ever get the chance to go anywhere near again. My friend John Tiffany was approached to direct it and suggested me to adapt it. And the next thing I knew, we were flying up to Edinburgh to sit with J.K. Rowling in her writing hut and talk about what she thought Harry, Hermione and Ron might be doing right now. And, talk about your head exploding. It was ridiculous. And as a massive fan of those books, it was joyous, and Joe was incredible all the way through the process in terms of guiding, supporting, prodding, poking, leading, and following some of the time too, as we found our way through the story.
Yeah, and of course you have a renowned portfolio of original work too across the stage and across the screen. Where do you find your inspiration to begin a new piece, and how do you begin?
So I'll talk about the thing that I'm doing most recently, which is we are currently filming a piece about the pandemic in care homes. And it came about because Stephen Graham, who's an actor I love and have worked with a number of times, came up to me and said, I need you to write something for me and Jodie Comer. And so it felt like it should be something about Liverpool. And I literally scratched around for a year trying to find an idea and couldn't find anything that worked. Then this horror thing, this horror show happened, and there was a case in Luton, which is a town I love and I lived in for 8 years, and there was a case within that community of a care home where they lost most of the residents. And I started to look into what was going on in care homes, and started to look into questions of dementia, and discovered the amount of young people who have dementia and are in those care homes, and it felt like this might be an opportunity to tell a story. We then started researching like mad, disappeared down various different rabbit holes as we were trying to find the truth what story to tell, and we eventually arrived at a story of a carer who starts at a care home and forms a relationship with someone with dementia inside it, and just before the pandemic hits, and then it's about how the two of them navigate their way through it. And it's a story told in anger. It's a story, you know, the more we looked into it, the more angry we became. I don't think I'd ever had research calls where people were openly weeping as they were telling us what was going on and how little support they'd had. And so we're trying to do justice to that. We're trying to do justice to the stories we've been told, and which is terrifying, obviously, but it's also what I think TV is brilliant at, which is putting a little piece of empathy in the corner of your room and forcing you to confront it.
And what an incredible response to the situation in which we're all finding ourselves. So how long would that project take to kind of go through the process? I mean, for those of us listening to this with such interest, when might we expect that to be packaged and ready for the broadcasters to put out?
I mean, we're filming now. This has happened faster than anything else I've ever been part of. We're filming now, and I think, you know, the aim would be to be on our screens sometime this year. It'll probably be towards the end of the year, maybe towards the end of the year. But you know, there's speed underneath it because we all feel like it's an important story to tell, and so we're all trying to tell it as well as possible, as quickly as possible. Here's Dark Materials, in contrast, takes forever because we need to film it, then we need to spend a year in post-production, then we put it on air. But that's because his Dark Materials has a lot of bits in it, you know.
Many worlds.
Exactly.
So many of us have been watching more and more TV and film over the past year, but many of us, I'm sure, are so much looking forward to returning to the theatres. Would you say writing for the stage and writing for the screen are quite distinct in terms of the art form, requiring perhaps different skills from the writer and offering different opportunities there? Or is there more overlap than perhaps we might at first imagine?
I mean, I try and keep it quite fluid, in that I think that sometimes what you get from TV you can use. For instance, Potter. I think if I'd stayed writing stage work solely and I'd been given Potter, there's no chance I'd have tried to tried to fit as many scenes into the play as we did, and that was sort of taking the lessons learnt from TV. Generally, TV is lonelier. You know, that theatre is collaborative and you are in a room with actors, and quite often in TV you don't have that. You know, that you're sort of trying to work out where you fit. But the pressure on the first draft in theatre is a lot greater than the pressure in TV. In terms of, you know, if and I'm not talking about the first step, because the first step of TV is, you know, that the doors you have to push through to get something made are ridiculous. But that thing of, if I produce a bad EP3, then we work on it together and we shape it together. If I produce a bad theatre piece, then it's just like, thank you very much for your time. See you later. So in some ways theatre is more collaborative, and in other ways TV is more collaborative, because that thing of, you know, the spanner is much more got out during TV on writing scripts than on theatre. The writers trusted a lot more in theatre, and so, you know,
So I guess, what to what extent do you kind of think about your audience when you're writing your work, and how does that kind of change across, you know, say your projects for Prime and your projects for theatre, where you're speaking to a very sort of a very small audience on a night per night basis?
What do you mean in terms of what sort of?
Yeah, I suppose, are you feeling more pressure when you're writing for someone like Prime to maybe appease more people, or choose a narrative or a style that will be more acceptable, more appealing to more greater numbers of people? Or it can.
You know what? I am starting to think a bit more like that. I didn't, and I think there is. I think I was pretty stupid not to. With you know, the bigger things I've done tend to have happened more accidentally than deliberately. So I mean, his done materials we were in, that we were following the book. You know what I mean? Like, you know, so there was no sort of like, how do we get enough people watching it? It was much more just, how do we tell this story as well as possible? With Harry Potter, it was, this is ridiculous. We don't quite know how to tell this story. We'll just kind of blunder through it. There's been times recently where I've realized I should have had much more of an eye on what the audience were thinking and how to guide people a bit more and be a bit more leaning towards the popular than I instinctively do. I'm trying to learn lessons from that at the moment, and I don't know what will result. I'll probably write rubbish, but yeah, I'm trying to think about it at the moment. Yeah.
And of course, you have written drama for radio.
Yes.
I would be so interested to know, because obviously we at the Society run a couple of awards for radio drama to celebrate the profile, and, you know, motivate and encourage writers to lend their hand to the audio drama format. I'll be so interested to know what importance that played for you in terms of your wider career as a writer, those radio commissions.
So I think I learned, there was a play I wrote called People Snogging in Public Places, which did well in terms of it won awards and stuff. And that, I think, for my confidence was huge. But also it was one where I went a bit wild and played with the form a bit. And I think that led to me challenging myself in other ways that I wouldn't expect to. I haven't written for radio in a long time. I should, but just other things have got in the way, and I haven't really found a story which felt like this is the place, that's the place to tell it. But yeah, I love it. And if you're asking for the medium in which the writer is most powerful in terms of getting what they want onto the chosen medium, nothing's like radio in that respect. You know, the script is absolutely essential to every part of the process, and everyone stands there with the script as they do their words, and so that's really joyful and nice. I'm not saying that I want to be listened to in the same way on everything, but it's nice to have happen every now and again.
Well, as we spoke about earlier, the world is precarious for so many at the moment, especially for writers and those in the arts. And the crisis has been in particular affecting the theatre industry. How has that touched upon your role as an associate writer at the Old Vic, for example?
Well, the Old Vic found a way through this pandemic that was involved Matthew being very, very clever, Matthew Waters being very, very clever with how he presented stuff. And the Old Vic, by using that live stream and by saying that the work is performed live every night, seemed to find a way of monetizing the internet that others are starting to now follow. My big worry is, and this is much more as being involved with Graeae and Graeae's work, and we did a thing called Crypts Without Constraints right at the beginning of it, which is now, we're now doing Crypts Without Constraints 2, which is showing every week on YouTube. my big worry was talking to writers during that, and I think it is a really, really huge concern, is that they were saying we were starting to break through. We were starting to be supported by theatres that really believed in their access programs and were really starting to challenge themselves about what they put on. After this pandemic, when the theatres will be most intent on survival, as they are, you know, and some of them haven't survived. In fact, quite a lot of theatres haven't survived regionally. Are those programs going to survive? And what happens to those writers who were starting to be listened to? And for disabled voices in particular, that's I think, well, for all aspects of representation, but disability is so far behind all others in terms of how it's valued as a diversity criteria. Disability is frequently left off discussions, and how those writers are going to be protected following this is a real concern for a lot of people, including very much myself.
Yeah. So, I mean, would you, on balance, say you're feeling optimistic about the pathways forward in the future? And if not, with hope, how are you keeping yourself grounded throughout the current pandemic?
Oh, I'm fine. Do you know what I mean? Like, you know, it's about other people. Do you know what I mean? Like, you know, it's particularly about the disabled community. And the thing about what's happened during all this is that we've all turned to digital devices. Things like this is made available to people, do you know what I mean, digitally. But most importantly, meetings are made available to people digitally. And one thing a lot of my friends in the community have said is, don't forget this. Don't forget this as a means of communication. Don't forget this as a means of inclusion. So in some ways, it's opened up some doors. You're just worried what doors close. And I do think that writing is a political act. I do think that empathy is a tool that we can use to change hearts and minds. And I do think that the whole meaning behind underlying health condition and the way that we separated people into two units during this crisis, and in particular separated deaths into two units and said these deaths are ones to be scared of and these deaths are just fine because they're disabled people and it doesn't matter, show that we need disabled voices to be elevated and protected and supported. I hope that when we come up the other side of this, that theatres, broadcasters, streamers don't forget those voices and find a way of elevating them.
Wow, thank you, Jack. That's so heartfelt. We've just got to 3 o'clock. I'm just going to turn some questions that were sent in advance before we pick up some from our chat. The first is from, do excuse my pronunciation again, Gaetano Setikazi, something of a fan of his Dark Materials. And he says, it's always a pleasure to hear you talking about your incredible work. And he was wondering how work on the season 3 of his Dark Materials is proceeding. And without giving too much away, what was your favourite scene to write in general for the show? He adds that he really can't wait for the Amber Spyglass, the third series.
Awesome. I hope we don't disappoint. We're well underway. We've got drafts of 6 scripts. We've got outlines of 2 more. We're pushing on. We're changing things. We're reinventing the wheel. We're looking at wheels quite a lot during the telling because there are some quite scary wheel questions coming down the line. In terms of what my favorite scene was to write so far, it involved a boat and a girl dealing with separation as she travels across a river to somewhere
Right.
dark and mysterious.
And yes, so you work with, as we know, Philip Pullman. But in terms of that relationship between the author of an underlying work and a scriptwriter, I should say this is a question from Caroline. Is it possible for a novelist to be involved, in your experience, in the actual act of writing the script? Or is that something that doesn't really happen in your experience across the industry?
Well, the biggest TV hit of the last year had the author absolutely central to it in terms of normal people. So absolutely, it is possible. I think it's happening more and more, actually. I'm seeing it happen more and more. And it's hard, I imagine. I've been asked to adapt my own stuff a few times from one medium to another, and I've always refused because I don't think I'd know how to do it. Because I think it's really hard to reinvent a story you told one way in another way. But I really envy and admire people that can do it. And yeah, I think there's much more of an appetite for that now than there ever has been before.
Wow. Thank you. And how do you translate the interior monologue of a character from a novel to the screen, apart from having the main character speak directly to the camera, breaking that fourth wall, as I think you had in Enola Holmes, which was rather wonderful. I think at one point she actually asked the audience what she should do.
Yeah. Sort of. Yes. I mean, if you work in script writing in whatever form, other than radio, of course, your real advantage is the actor's face, and that can tell so much of your story. If you've got Ruth Wilson's face and you write a key stage direction for that face, then you can tell a page and a half of exposition. Where it's more difficult is when the character is on their own. Enola Holmes is about someone who is alone, that her name spelled backwards is alone. And so that was the first thing I said to the film company when I pitched for it, which was she needs to talk to us because she's not going to have anyone else to talk to. And whereas when you're writing Lyra and Will, you can work out a way to get some of Will's thoughts and some of Lyra's thoughts that Philip has expressed through prose into a conversation. When Enola has no one to talk to, that can't happen. So right from the start, she was talking to us, and that was it was a fun device to play with.
And is it something you picked up from the theatre, or is that something that wouldn't happen in the theatre?
What direct address?
The breaking of that fourth wall where you
I've done it in theatre. I did it with a play called Solid Life of Sugar Water, and I've done 2 monologues for stage 2, which are quite like that. Fleabag obviously proved the incredible power of doing that. But there are examples through history. Shakespeare was pretty good at it. It's just a fun device to play with every now and again. I wouldn't want to do it on everything because it does mean that you're making a decision as to what you want your audience to be ignorant of, in a way that you're not always when you're writing scenes where the subtext can play much. You know, the subtext tells that story as much as it can.
Thank you. Moving on, which film, this is from Sean, which film do you wish you had written and why?
Oh my gosh. So many. Probably E.T. My son's called Elliot. I've got Be Good tattooed on my wrist. I am an E.T. obsessive. I do think it's a perfect film, but there's lots of others. I'd like to have written Nanny Moretti's The Sun's Room. I'd like to have written The Godfather. I'd like to have written lots of films.
Yeah.
Sadly, I don't have the talent, but I wish I had written those. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. From Matthew in the chat, how do you find time to do so many different projects at the same time? Do you clone yourself, he asks.
I love writing and write a lot. I definitely last year ended up in a situation where too many things were happening at once. It wasn't because I tried to make that happen at once. It was that a lot of projects from a long time ago suddenly surfaced, and I was treading water desperately as I was trying to deal with them all, and it wasn't fun, and my mental health definitely suffered. I won't do anything like that again. But I can't believe I've been given these opportunities, and so when opportunities do come along, I get a bit desperate and possibly try too hard and overextend myself and screw myself up a bit.
From Liz Mason, Liz asks, do you look for an exceptional novel to adapt to the screen? Are you browsing the bookshelves looking for novels and assessing their adaptation potential?
No, and I'm not very good at that. Every now and again, I'll come up with something good, but mostly with novels, they get brought to me rather than the other way around. There's lots of novels that I thought I would be able to do that then turn into mush in my hands. And I tell you a novel I tried really hard to make, which people were just like, why are you doing that? And I still think it could be beautiful, but I just think it requires probably a finer mind than mine. God, I've forgotten the writer's name. It's a book called Independence Day. It's a sequel to The Sports Writer. What's his name? Brilliant. Won the Pulitzer. It's a really simple story of a guy going on a road trip with his son, trying to reconnect with him as he and they end up and they tour different halls of fame. Richard Ford. They've just answered it in the thing.
I was going to say
yeah. Thank you very much, Matthew and David. I love that book so much, and I mentioned it to everyone. And there are some books like that I'm desperate. I'd love to do Anne Tyler's Dinner at the Homesick Restaurant, but I've never found a partner for that. So no, I'm not very good at sort of smelling the next thing that's going to be the thing. I'm much the adaptations I do tend to be other people's ideas that I then very excitedly jump on the back of.
Yeah, thank you, Jack. Paul asks, as starting seems to be the hardest thing to do, could you tell us how you were invited to write the episode of Shameless that you wrote very early on in your career? Was this as a result of your shorts, your portfolio, your agent, or your communication with the makers of the show? And he also thanks you for your National Treasure.
Oh, thank you. That came about because I was working with Company Pictures on Skins. So Company Pictures make Skins and Shameless. And I was hired on Skins because they came and saw a play of mine at the Bush called When You Cure Me. And they came and saw When You Cure Me and thought that I would be interesting for Skins. And I became part of that writer's room. And because they liked what I was doing on Skins, I was invited on to Shameless too. But it was it was amazing and incredibly daunting. But both things sort of happened at once: Skins followed by Shameless in quick succession.
Yeah,
I totally agree that starting is so hard, and I still think TV has a problem in not reaching out to new names, and it's something we need to work out ways to address. And I'm sorry if people are struggling, because it's a horrible marketplace.
Question from Miranda Walker: how difficult / easy was it to get the brilliant Kryptales greenlit? And are there plans for a second series? What can you tell us?
It came about because of Debbie Christie, who works at the BBC, who had done previously monologues about women. So I think they were called, oh God, what were they called? Snatches. And then there was the Queers that was about that. And then there was the monologue specifically about Windrush. And then we were the fourth ones, I believe. And Debbie got Matt Fraser involved, who's a very good friend of mine, who's been in like 5 of my things. And Matt assembled a team of disabled writers, and asked me to be one of them. And it was glorious. In terms of doing another one, I think that's not the way that format works. But I think there is a desire amongst the writing team of that we find some other way of working together again, because it was really glorious, and it was really exciting to walk into a room where full of people I mainly knew, but mainly knew from theatre, and see them making their TV debuts. Amit Sharma, who directed my episode, had directed a play of mine before. Robert Softly Gale, who played the lead in my one, is a writer I've loved for ages and never quite is an actor I'd loved for ages and never quite found a way to work with before. And there was a writer on it called Genevieve Barr, who is an actress I'd worked together with a number of times. And I introduced her to Matt as part of this and said, could she write one? And I'd sort of script edit it. And since then, Jen and I have written another thing together, and now we're writing another thing. And so that's been a really important new relationship for me. So yeah, no, it's been that was glorious.
Well, thank you, Jack. And final question from Nikki Wiltshire, who greatly enjoyed your Q&A last week for Radioactive. And thanks you for helping her with the way she writes. You have written in so many different styles of genre, from fantasy to retelling real life events, and even re-scripting movies already out, like The Secret Garden, that I think is on Sky currently. How do you adapt them to make them unique? And do they have to be written differently in script form?
I don't quite understand in terms of what's the writing the stories or adapting stories.
I guess how do you add your sort of unique form? I guess if you're adapting a property that's already been on the television, what do you do to ensure that it's new, it's a retelling, it's a wholly new project?
So when I'm working with new writers, the thing I always tell them when I'm mentoring, basically, and I hate the word mentoring, so but when I'm mentoring, the thing I always tell them is the most important thing to get into their pitch is why they are the only writer that could write it, which doesn't mean that they are the best writer to write it, but they are the only writer that could write this version of it. And there's always got to be a reason why it's you. And there's always got to be a reason why, and you've got to preserve that reason all the way through the process. As everything else gets hit at you from all sides, you've got to preserve the you of it. Because otherwise, what's the point? Otherwise, you're not a writer, you're just a transcriber, or you're just a, do you know what I mean? Like, you're just a whatever. And it can be due to your experience of, do you know what I mean? Like, Wonder, for instance, which is the first, Hollywood thing I did, came about because I'd spent 6 months bedbound and had to leave university, and then had to go back again as a much more physically fragile person, and felt like I could use that to tell Augie's story. Felt like there were ways in which I could get inside those questions, and I tried to talk about it quite a lot in the pitch, and then I tried to make sure when I was thinking about the book that I was always trying to think back to that time. It's it's sort of method writing, but it's just sort of going that there's got to be something that you're searching for an answer to. And for me, it was what that took. And when you're going through it, you're not really analysing it, you're just trying to survive. But when you look back at it, you can kind of go, there was this, this, and this. And then there was this when I completely let down a friend of mine, because I was so into my own story and my own journey that I couldn't quite see the bigger picture. And going back into that and trying to use that, I think, is a really important part of adapting. In particular, I mean, writing obviously, but writing you've got your blank page. When you're adapting, you've got a book, and you've got to be loyal to that book, but you've got to work out why you are the one for that book. And yeah, if that makes sense.
Well, thank you, Jack. You've spoken with such passion and eloquence today. It's been a real pleasure. We have now just exceeded our allotted time for today, I'm afraid, and it is now time to lower the digital curtain on today's event. Thank you, Jack. It's been so fun to talk to you, and thank you to everyone who submitted questions in advance and asked questions in the chat. I'm sorry we didn't get through all of those. I was working from the earliest to the more recent. It just remains me to remind everyone that all our afternoon tea sessions are free, but if you can afford to donate a few pounds to your contingency fund, you can find the link in the chat. Our next afternoon tea will be part of the TA at Home week, and we'll see the translator Anne McLean and author Javier Cercas in conversation on the 11th of February. To book, just head to societyofauthors.org/events. Recordings for most of our events are available on our Vimeo and YouTube channels. And I should also add that much of Jack's work is currently available to stream or watch again, as is the way these days. And that includes my particular favourites, which we didn't really talk about much today, the Eddy on Netflix. Absolutely fantastic script and track and musical additions there. The Aeronauts, of course, and Enola Holmes on Amazon Prime. His Dark Materials on the BBC. And of course, goes without saying, we can't wait for the third series. And also The Accident, National Treasure on 4 on Demand. Feel free to continue the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag SOA at Home. For now, we'll say goodbye, and thanks again to Jack and also to our partners, the Royal Society of Literature.
Thank
Jack,
you very much.
So much.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Sorry if I'm not very good at speaking, but thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye. Bye.